Hello and welcome to UPL Insights, a digital media series from UPL, led by our friends, colleagues and experts across the world. In this series, we bring together leaders in sustainable farming, food systems and climate resilience to explore the challenges and developments defining the agricultural sector today. We are recording this episode in the build-up towards this year's Africa Green Revolution Forum Global Summit, the biggest annual agriculture event for Africa, which is continuing its mission to transform agriculture. This year, the AGRF Summit will be held in Kenya and explore the theme of pathways to recovery and resilient food systems. In the lead-up to this momentous event, we have been talking to some of the people leading our food system transformation inside and outside of UPL and exploring new and existing priorities alongside our shared commitment to resilience, trade, nourishment, and sustainable productivity. So today we'd like to talk about rice. As announced at last year's summit, UPL is leading a new project with AGRA to support rice production and food autonomy across West Africa, with a target of doubling the yield on 600,000 hectares of local rice in 6 countries by 2025. Across the world, 3.5 billion rely on rice as a daily staple. And within sub-Saharan Africa, a significant 34 million tons of it are consumed. Despite its importance to food security in the region, as well as the area's favorable climate and growing conditions, a staggering 43% of rice is imported in Africa. The COVID pandemic and resulting lockdowns and trade restrictions has placed new urgency on the need to build a resilient, self-sufficient and prosperous rice sector. But the question is, how do we get there? So to start answering this central question, today I'm joined by Fadel Ndiama, Vice President of AGRA, and Isaac Mungoma, Investment Manager at IDH, the Sustainable Trade Initiative. Thank you both for joining us on this new episode. And I would like to start this conversation by asking you, Fadel, what challenges Africa's rice sector has faced over the past year and past decade, and what are the priority actions needed to help it rebuild?
Thank you, Florent, and it's really good to be with you and to bring through me the voice of AGRA into this partnership. I think you have really laid very well the issue, the challenge. The facts you started with, which is the reality that we consume a lot of rice across the continent. And, you quoted the figure of 30 million tons of meal rice consumed across sub-Saharan Africa. That's probably even more paddy, because you need more paddy to get to meal rice. Now, this is consumed, but obviously a significant part of this is imported. Now, which also already speaks to one of the reality. If we have so many resources, land, water, know-how, technology on the continent, the simple fact that we are importing it means that we are actually spending very scarce foreign currency into buying something that could be produced locally. And obviously the opportunity cost in terms of employment, wealth creation for Africa is big. But trading is good. It's not to imply that it's a problem. The issue is exactly the second point you made, is because of COVID-19, we got exposed to the worst case scenario where even those imports were not completely feasible. I mean, one of the numbers I have here is if you take Thailand, which is one of the countries that Africa import most from, as part of the COVID-19, we had a decline of almost 30% of the importation, which translated into significant increases in food prices to the magnitude of 27%, which means we have here a scenario where, because of the disruption of the supply chain, African people have been directly exposed to food scarcity, and that obviously we know will affect the poorest of the poor. So that's the basic problem that we are dealing with. Now, the bigger challenge is how quickly, how effectively can Africa become more self-sufficient in rice production, starting with a proper import substitution strategy. If you are importing 43% of what you consume, it means you need time to do it. It's not realistic to think you can do it very quickly, but you can be very deliberate around how to do it. So that's the first point. So the bigger challenge is how do we strengthen and the domestic supply chain to make sure that the continent is able to gradually move from import substitution to self-sufficiency, sovereignty in a sustainable way. Actually, it has to be a pathway. So that's the big challenge. Now, it is underpinned by some structural issue that we need to deal with. The first one is, if we are importing so much, despite all the effort made across the continent to produce rice, it means we have significant challenges in terms of productivity and competitiveness. Ultimately, we have to be able to produce high quality rice and deliver it to African consumers at an acceptable cost. So competitiveness is a big challenge. Linked to that, if you want to go a bit deeper, is the lack of competitiveness is directly linked to also very inefficient milling techniques, because ultimately your competitiveness has to do with the quality you are able to generate. So if you are not milling high quality at an effective cost, obviously it will affect your ability to compete with the kind of rice coming. The problem is not so much, I mean, we talk about yield increases, etc., but we all have evidence, sometimes anecdotal or localized, of cases where African rice production we have been able to have very high yield. I mean, the case of north of Senegal, where you have, irrigated at least minimum of 5 metric ton and beyond, time 2 is really, can compare to any level of production. The production is not the only problem. It's competitiveness, which has to do with quantity, quality, and timeliness. So milling is critical, and I will come back to that. The second point that I see as a problem is you have so much intervention in rice, but they are fragmented. Government are doing a lot in building infrastructure, irrigation, providing extension, doing research. Development partners and NGOs are supporting farmers. Some people are supporting millers, but it's not done in a coordinated way. And I think we need to remember here we are dealing with a chain whose efficiency ultimately depends on how well it is coordinated. So that's a point that I want to come back. Third point we need to deal with is policy issue, because things pertaining to production, consumption, importation hinges significantly on the kind of policy that government are adopting across the continent. And we have to say that across the continent, especially in West Africa, you do have some policy at the national and regional level. But very often, the protection measures used are tariffs, which basically is increasing the cost of importation. In the short term, it works, but in the long term, it may not be as efficient. We are getting more and more evidence that we need also to combine the short-term measure with more direct measure addressing the challenges that I mentioned earlier. Productivity, quality, reliability of the chain, and ultimately making sure that you have a conducive environment that enables the formation of effective public-private partnership. So that's a very high level, but in a simple way, this is what we think are the problem and the challenges. And obviously, we can speak later to what is required to solve those. Back to you, Florent.
Thank you very much, Fadel. And I really want to jump on your remarks about competitiveness and strengthening the local value chains to ask Isaac to share a bit of his experience with IDH and the work IDH has been doing to incentivize the private sector, incentivize the finance sector, the banks, to de-risk this rice sector and really facilitate stimulation of local production, but also local transformation and ultimately distribution. So Isaac, how can IDH support the private sector in Africa to make this rice autonomy a reality?
Hey, Florent, I appreciate being here today. So IDH has several initiatives, and I will be speaking specifically about the IDH FarmFit Fund, which is part of an integrated solution, including the IDH FarmFit Business Solutions, which is a business unit within the whole IDH. So basically, the way we have approached it and the way we are looking at it, as Dr. Fadel has just laid out, the problem is properly framed. We understand what the problem is at a conceptual level, but we do recognize that, Africa is not just one village, it's a multitude of different locations, and at different geographical locations, the challenges are different. In some areas, the challenge is production. In some areas, the challenge is not the productivity, but the milling. It's at the milling level. In other areas, it's also the intervention of the smallholder farmers, at that level, to get them to adopt climate smart production techniques. Access to finance for them also is an issue. And I think the access to finance is an issue across the entire value chain, because even the mills themselves, the banks themselves sometimes also do not have the finance to lend to the value chain and to the smallholder farmers. And overall, there's a general reluctance, by these commercial players to intervene and provide finance to smallholder-centric transactions. So in this particular value chain, IDH's intervention has been, to understand the local issues, understand what the problem is in that particular geographical location, and then work together with the different value chain actors, the smallholder farmers, maybe even the contract farmers at that level, the mills, the guys who will provide the logistics, so that we are not only just addressing the issue of quality and quantity and timeliness, as Dr. Fadel has mentioned, but we are also trying to improve the milling techniques to get them to be, 21st century and beyond. We need to be state of the art. And if we are able to do that, there is quite a bit of capital that is required into this value chain. So IDH FarmFit Fund as a concept was set up to take the highest risk position in these farmer-centric transactions. And the idea is that we shall reduce the risk that is borne by the farmers, borne by the mills, and also borne by the lenders in these transactions. Now, how we do it is we take a subordinated tranche. It could be subordinate, but in most cases, it's a junior tranche paired together with a senior lender, who in most cases is a commercial financier. We try as much as possible to provide that buffer, that junior buffer in a transaction that would reduce the level of risk that a senior lender would ideally, take on in that transaction. Now, when a senior lender takes on that risk, it is reflected in the pricing of the lending to the mill. It's reflected in the terms that are offered to the smallholder farmers who are borrowing from them. And in most cases, these become restrictions that price, the smallholder farmers and the mills out of the market. Now, the FarmFit solution is that we'll come in with, our junior facilities, and in other scenarios, we'll also provide a loss guarantee provided by USDFC that would provide protection of up to 50% of a senior lender's potential losses in a transaction. So, in a nutshell, the objective of the fund is really to demonstrate that farmer financing can be done, in a sustainable way, and that it can result in a reduction of, the costs borne by the smallholder farmers, borne by the value chain actors and the financiers in a transaction. So I would say that is really our intervention at this point in time. But we also have to be, alive to the fact that different jurisdictions have different challenges, right down from policy level to production at smallholder farmer level, to the challenges that the millers and value chain actors will encounter. And we as FarmFit Fund have focused our guns on working with the smallholder farmers and with the value chain actors as long as we can demonstrate that there is either a direct or indirect benefit to the smallholder farmer, because that's really the core of our intervention. As Dr. Fadel said, you know, there's fragmented intervention, but we like to think that we are more collaborative because of our additionality requirement. We can only participate up to 30% of the value of any transaction. That means in everything we do, we have to play a convening role. We have to bring in, you know, the private sector, bring in other players to be part and parcel of our intervention. We can't do it on our own. Back to you, Florent.
Thank you, Isaac. It's really interesting to see how you're working with the different links of the value chains at different levels to really build an ecosystem that will incite for private ventures in agriculture and in the rice sector in particular. And we really need this kind of intervention to de-risk and invite more private companies to invest and not fear to jump in this very central crop. But so, as you rightly said, and to build on Fadel's initial remarks, we also need coordination from other actors beyond the private sector to build a competitive export market in Africa. Let's dream about it. Not only ensures self-sufficiency, but an economic surplus that would stimulate the whole value chain. Fadel, what do you think should be the role of governments, interprofessions, and also maybe the role of public-private partnerships to create a favorable ecosystem?
No, thanks, Florent. And I want to agree with Isaac's intervention. I think on two major points I want to highlight. Firstly, the critical role of finance and the need to de-risk. And I think I think it's an important concept here, because the reality is, if you think about the value chain, you know, from the input distribution to the consumption, you have different segments that have different profile in terms of value and risk. And the reason why, because we are interested for the whole chain to operate, we need to make sure that we identify the weakest segment and we are able to de-risk them so that everybody can gain. So I think that concept is really beautiful, and it really compels us to have a collective approach to that. So, and I will come back to that. But I think just to remind you that if the ultimate is the end of the game, the goal is to become more productive, more competitive, to the point where we can generate surplus. I like that scenario, because we don't want always to be in a situation where we are, you know, net buyers and trying just to feed ourselves. But fundamentally, we know what needs to happen. And I will just give you three very high level, and we can go to the detail. And I fully agree with you, Isaac. We can be talking about the general principle, but all of this require specific application in specific geography. Basically, you need specific response to a global challenge. But what is the global challenge? So the first one is around productivity. And I think the main ingredient here, when we talk about rice, is making sure that we have improved water management system. Now, if you are thinking about competing and generating surplus, you cannot rely solely on rain-fed rice production. As somebody was saying, what the plant needs is not rain, but water. And what is required here is really improved water management. And that will require using the cutting-edge technology around, excuse me, laser-graded leveling technology that enable you to understand exactly what water is needed from where. Water is a critical resource. The way it is managed, distributed, will contribute, excuse me, because ultimately, all your input will need water. You can bring all the know-how, all the technologies, and all the fertilizer required. Without water, it doesn't. So that's the starting point. And because of that is why, and it's kind of, I'm building the case for why you need a public-private partnership. The kind of investment required, I don't think Isaac will be the key funder of an irrigation scheme. This is government's role, and typically this is where government have the capacity to play a big role in investing in this infrastructure, but also helping support the research and development, which again are public function. These are public goods that are best conducted for the benefit of all. But we have very good example of these. I think we have more time. I just want to make reference to, there is a farm in Tanzania called the Mamboleo farm in Tanzania. Give you a good illustration of how you can use this level of technology really for water management. Now, obviously, besides the water, you need everything else. The right varieties, the right agronomic practices, and the right management, not only of the crop, but also of the scheme. I mean, there's a whole system that needs to be managed to make sure that you have a efficient production system. Second point, where remember the issue of fragmentation, it's not only from the point of view of intervention. When you're dealing with smallholder farmers, you have a large number of undercapitalized, hardworking people who are scattered in very many geographies. In economic terms, it translates into significant transaction cost. If you have to make significant back and forth, the logistical requirement of collecting the paddy, taking it to the milling, processing it and taking it to the market is huge. Now, one of the concepts that have been applied, and I want to salute the leadership of Dr. Adesina, who actually applied this concept when he was Minister of Agriculture in Nigeria, is what we was calling the staple food processing zone. And the whole idea, you do a co-location of production schemes with processing facility so that you reduce and minimize the distance between production and processing. It's not only important from a physical point of view of proximity, it's also important from a point of view of communication around the quality requirement. Remember, it's a team game, it's a team play in order to satisfy the market requirement. So you need to have mechanism of translating back what is the market looking for, quantity, quality, taste, etc. And the processor being private sector operators linked to the distributors, closer to the farmers, will provide that setup that enables us to really optimize from that point of view. Here also, we have a very good example in southern Mozambique, and I can give you more examples. So none of the things I'm talking about are theoretical. People are doing them. And I think the challenge is to learn enough about how it is done and figure out ways of scaling them, with the proper adaptation. So that's the second imperative. Third element is everything that has to do with all the support services around retailing, coordination, distribution, and marketing. The full chain has to be managed. And from that point of view, the few challenges that I want to highlight is making sure that all these segments, and this is why, Isaac, now your tools are extremely important. All the SMEs, all the operator private sector need both working capital and CapEx. And as things are now, given the financial infrastructure ecosystem, they are very unlikely to get a loan at an acceptable rate because of the risk factor. This is where de-risking becomes extremely important. And from that point of view, I want to also give you an example of what in Ghana, they are really combining. What the government has done is to put together the rice interprofession to work with GIRSAL. GIRSAL is the Ghana Risk Incentive Sharing Facilities. Again, this facility has been done not only in Ghana, but it started in Nigeria, we've done it in Kenya, and basically it's a de-risking mechanism, where not only you de-risk the financial value chain along, like you're doing it, Isaac, but you also de-risk the agricultural value chain by making sure that the different players are aligned. So in doing so, you create the case for all these players, like in Ghana, have a stake in producing and promoting locally produced rice to meet the quantity, quality, and timeliness requirement. It's a team, but it doesn't happen by chance. So to answer your question, you can imagine a future where we can now start exporting And I think the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, Act that started this year, or last year, is probably a training ground for them, because I think initially it's more realistic to start moving from surplus region to deficit region, even within a country, to the point you're making, Isaac, to start having more efficient cross-border trade, to start optimizing the trade across the economic unions, across the continent, and through that mechanism, gain the economies of scale and the efficiency in financing and logistics that is required to be able now to export. But you're absolutely right, Florent. Ultimately, the name of the game is to create wealth. But in this game, you have to create it for everybody. You have to risk share and make sure that we are an optimal ecosystem that can unlock value for all its players. So that's the scheme. And again, Isaac, I can reassure it's not only theoretical. We have concrete examples on the ground, not done by players, including IDH. I want to cite one important initiative that is spearheaded by ECOWAS called Offensiverie, which really give a case where, under the leadership of ECOWAS, which really stand for the countries, the political commitment for self-sufficiency is translated into a regional program around which most of the development partners are coordinating their effort to make sure that we enable this initiative to take on. It's a big construction, but it's a significant one that speaks to really limiting the fragmentation and making sure that we support the sector in a more effective way. Oh.
Thank you very much, Fadel. We now have a clear view and a clear roadmap to work on. Thanks for sharing these lessons from other countries as well. This is really insightful. So Isaac, are you happy to work along these lines? And what do you think IDH can envisage in the coming years in terms of intervention for the rice sector on the African continent specifically?
Yeah, I mean, what Dr. Fadel is saying is it's very clear. The message is loud and clear. It's important that there is you know, we reduce the level of fragmentation in terms of the interventions. It's always good to collaborate. I believe the magnitude of the problem is really big, that, you know, all the different interventions that are out there are much needed. But like he said, you know, there needs to be some very and very definitive common threads running through all these interventions. One thing he mentioned that I picked up on and my commercial instincts really kicked in there is that, you know, even as we intervene, we must be creating wealth for everyone involved in the value chain. Not only the financial institutions who are providing the financing, not only the millers and you know, the input providers, the irrigation, you know, mechanical tools, you know, providers, but also for the smallholder farmer. And FarmFit Fund, our focus has been primarily on that side of the value chain, looking at how we can strengthen sourcing at SME level from smallholder farmers, make sure that we can pass on some of the wealth that is generated through, you know, better pricing to them. Like he mentioned again, you know, we can only do that if we streamline the logistics, if we streamline the milling. Then, you know, you'll be able to convince a miller, for example, to adopt, you know, better pricing methodology for the smallholder farmer if he's able to see, you know, cost savings because of improved milling techniques, for example, or reduced cost in logistics. And those are kind of some of the interventions that we are looking at within the value chain. If we can streamline the value chain, you know, from the top all the way from the financing to the operations of the millers, to the pricing to the smallholder farmers and the, you know, the production techniques on their farms, you know, we believe that across the value chain, it will be mutually beneficial for everyone participating in it. So if I dare to dream, you know, what I would like to see from IDH's perspective is, you know, a sustainable rice value chain in every African country where we are self-sufficient. Food security is not a problem, you know, because the farmers who are working in this particular value chain are benefiting from, you know, good prices. They're outputting, you know, high quality, high quantities of rice paddy that then goes to the millers who mill efficiently, you know, and can deliver to the market a quality product at an affordable cost that, again, these farmers with their improved incomes will be able to, you know, purchase at a competitive rate. And this will really help us to, you know, do proper import substitution, because again, the magnitude of how much, you know, foreign currency is lost in Africa to buying something that we could be growing locally is really astounding. So I think that would be the future that I envisage, a mutually beneficial arrangement across an entire value chain for all the actors involved. And also, and I must highlight, you know, smallholder farmers at the key of our approach. If we can get the smallholder farmers to dial in and, you know, participate actively, have access to finance, have access to offtake, you know, guaranteed offtake from the millers at reasonable prices, have the millers have access to finance at reasonable prices from the financial sector, you know, alongside our participation in de-risking, you know, the different levels of the value chain, then we'll have, you know, the limit for growth is really unquantifiable. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Isaac, for these nice remarks and very aspirational remarks for inclusive growth around the rice sector. There's one last point on one last type of actor that we didn't really mention today in our interventions. It's the different donor partners. We know that beyond individual governments, we also have a lot of donor partners mobilized around this rice issue. So, Fadel, as a leading African institution, how can we mobilize different governments and donor partners, do you think, around a single blueprint for rice self-sufficiency? And what would be the role AGRA would be willing to take in this?
Thanks very much, Florent. And Isaac, thank you for articulating so powerfully the vision. I'll come back to you, Florent. And if you allow me just to continue on that trend quickly, I think for me, it's really, you know, it's a matter of V's, and I will tell you 5 V's, 5. The first one is the vision, what just, you know, that Isaac articulated so well, which is anchored on prosperity, shared wealth, sustainability, you know, for all. And I think for this to happen, you need a second V. And this is what we were talking about this morning with the farmer forum, his voice, is listening to everybody. Because if you, I mean, we all know the African proverb, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. I want to another one. Your caravan will always go at the speed of the slowest camel. Which one is the slowest camel? It compels us really to, and this is why your de-risking comes in. If you neglect one segment, we will all suffer. That's the second V. So the third V in the case of rice is volume. You need volume, you know, to be able to break even, to meet the challenges. And this is why you need to mobilize all the technologies, combine all rice production system, but make a lot of emphasis on irrigation and water management and water control, so that we can't completely be dependent on rainfall, even though rain-fed agriculture remains important. Now, the fourth V is value. Volume has to be translated in value, and this is where now the efficiency of your system in converting those volume into quality. Quality ultimately is not right, it's a culture. It's, I mean, I think the Japanese has a concept, I don't remember. It's really a culture of quality across the board. And I think from an intervention point of view, when you're dealing with a problem of this magnitude, how do you orchestrate it? And this is where will lead me to your question, Florent. And the final V is viability, just so that it's easy to remember. There's 5 V. Vision, voice, volume, value, and viability. For me, I consider these to be the imperative. These are the requirements, around which we'll build what we're talking about. In that context, you mentioned the donor, and at AGRA, actually, our drive, actually, what we believe is basically a smallholder focus centered, private sector led, science driven agricultural transformation. But the starting point should be the leadership of farmers and their government. The problem you have very often, Florent, is you have many. I have a friend who is a minister in one of those countries. In his office, I will not tell you which country because you may know. I want to reveal his identity. He has a board, a blackboard of listing all the projects he's in charge of. It's more than 200. All of them are money being funded now. And the bigger problem he has is how do I make sure that they all contribute to my objective? So from the donor point of view, significant investment is happening. And I think we should, and some of them are running amazing program. I can give you, just to give an example, I don't want to be biased. I was very impressed with the portfolio that the Islamic Development Bank built on rice in a very short period of time, covering at least 10 African countries with an integrated rice value chain development. Very quickly. It's an example. I mean, they are the World Bank, African Development Bank, etc. So money is there. The bigger problem is not lack of money, but lack of order. How do we make sure that all this money are supporting a vision that have been defined by the actors, not only government, but the interprofession and all of that, that those players are very clear about their own role, and donors are all supporting a strategic approach that is consistent with that, instead of everybody trying to plant their own flag. I think an example of that to mention, Florent, is PIATA came out of that, the Partnership for Inclusive Agricultural Transformation, where several partners came and aligned their efforts, and I will not name them. USAID is one of them. The FCDO, the UK Development Agency, the German Corporation, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, and there are other partners who are joining. I think the innovative piece here is these partners are collaborating, and it doesn't replace the coordination mechanisms that exist at country level, where you have the donor coordination, etc. But the example here is all of them backing one model, one vision, and leveraging each other's resource to the point that we increase the efficiency of the investment, so that 1 + 1 = 10, not 2 or 3. Now, all of this is done, remind me, and I want to go back to Isaac, I think you'll be very happy. Ultimately, this game is a private sector game. All of this money by government, by donors, if it doesn't leverage and unlock financial investment, starting with what farmers themselves are investing, what millers are investing, or what other players along the value chain are doing, this is where the real money is. Some of these players don't have any challenge getting commercial loan, actually, because they feature in the segment of high value, low risk. They can get all the money they want. But the point here is, I think this is where AGRA, through a platform like AGRF, and this is where our partnership is very important with UPL, where we bring all the big players, all the players. It's probably the biggest gathering on agricultural transformation on the continent, where you have from head of state to farmers, all discussing and showcasing best practices with the view of supporting one integrated agenda for a successful transformation of the food system across the continent. So I don't know whether I'm answering your question, but I think the centrality of a coordination around a vision, but also an understanding that the role of everybody is to unlock, because we need each other. The public sector cannot do it alone. You need private sector. But private sector will not come in if the environment is not favorable. That environment should be informed by the challenges and the opportunities faced by all the value chain players. And this is why you really need to have a coalition approach into addressing the issue of rice. And I'm very happy to, you know about CARD, which is a coordination mechanism on rice across the continent, which really coordinate all the effort made by African government. We have specialized institutions like Africa Rice, who are doing an amazing job in promoting technologies. I think we all recognize the role of the CGIAR and the NARS. So it's basically a case for a coalition-based building to make sure that we all support a successful rice development across the continent.
That's really our hope and aspiration, and that's really the meaning of the rice race that UPL is trying to promote around AGRF, Momentum Forum. So I'm only left with thank you so much, Fadel and Isaac, for being our guests today and sharing your insights on the central issue of African rice self-sufficiency. You can subscribe to UPL channel on YouTube and follow the full UPL Insights series also on Spotify and Apple Music. And you can also follow UPL intervention during AGRF Forum in the week of September 6 to 10. Thanks for watching, and we hope to see you on the next one.